If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. I'd like to begin by describing myself because I believe it's relevant to my story. I have to assume that I'm not the average author here. I'm 25, male, a bit above average height. I've been doing sports 5 or 6 times a week since I graduated high school. Gym, running, CrossFit, squash, swimming, and any team sport my friends decide to play at any given time. My hobbies include mountaineering, hiking, and bouldering. I just recently purchased a new high-altitude mountaineering boot because it's near the end of the summer season and they're on sale. The plan is to wear them in the Alps next summer on a few ascents. I live in a European capital, one that's surrounded by wonderful nature with many trails, as well as opportunities for hiking. I decided to break in my boots last Sunday. More specifically, because it would have been my granddad's birthday. He loved to hike before he passed away. These boots are overkill for these woods, but I needed to try them. I selected a nice route that's around 25 kilometers and set off at about 9 in the morning. It rained just before, so I expected a fair amount of mud and not so many people, as these are easily scared off by the weather. Since the summer was excruciatingly hot, it was a nice change of temperature, especially between trees and such, where it's a few degrees cooler than in the city. So in the not so distant past, my dog would have definitely joined me on my hike, but she's turning 15 this year and doesn't like long distant walks anymore. My girlfriend had to do something for work upon short notice, so I knew from that moment I would be doing this alone. Now the first part of the hike was perfect. The altitude difference wasn't too bad. I barely broke a sweat, and I misjudged how many people would be out due to the storm the day before. I met about 6 or 7 people in the first 2 or 3 hours, and most of them were cross-country runners. It's worth mentioning that I wasn't walking quickly. I stopped upon many occasions to take pictures or study some animal tracks. There are deer and wild boars in these woods. Nothing menacing. Now between 12 and 1, the path ran into an actual road, one where cars can go. This road is asphalt, but deep in the forest, and can only be used to reach certain landmarks that are also in the forest, so cars are very, very rare here. Now the trail that I was on required me to go slow sometimes. Now as I'm walking down the road, I hear a car approaching from behind me. It goes past me, not too quick or slow. It was an older green SUV with a fresh registration, probably an import. Anyway, I thought nothing of it at the time. Then I heard it come back. It drove past me for the second time, now very slow. I could clearly see 2 men sitting in the front seats, wearing baseball caps and sunglasses. Both had beard game going on as well. I assumed they were gameskeepers, even though those cars have a crest on the hood and both doors. As I hike a fair amount, I knew these things. I see them around a bit. They would also not be driving a car like this. They have jeeps which are more suitable for the forest. I feel no discomfort, and again, think nothing of it. Then, My trail left the asphalt road and began to snake through the woods again. I walk ahead, gazing at trees and whatnot. Then I suddenly had the strange sensation that something or someone was behind me. An engine sound was becoming more and more clear. At this point the trail was narrow, but if for whatever reason you wanted to drive a car on it, you could. Now if I turned around, I could aforemention the SUV and see that it was basically in my face. It was an arm's length away from me, and it stopped as I had. I look at the driver who's staring back at me. They're wearing sunglasses. I calmly ask, "What's wrong?" "Shall I let you go on?" in a polite but irritated tone as his window begins to roll down. He didn't speak. He slowly begins reversing and slowly disappeared behind a curve. Now I was quite uncomfortable. I also noticed that he's alone in the car, unlike earlier. I listened intently, standing still, since I wasn't sure what was going on. Now, I'm scared, but there was a faint feeling of unease in the air, and bad thoughts gathered in the back of my mind. I heard the car and the engine stop just behind the curve. I heard a door open and shut, but nothing beyond that point on. I turned around and began walking towards my destination at a much faster pace than before. Now I was a bit scared. I didn't understand why he didn't answer, and why he simply reversed and didn't say a word. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I had no desire to ask him again, or see him for that matter. I'm really struggling to take these unpleasant thoughts out of my head. Now, I've been drinking a lot of water like normal, especially up on these hikes, and I decide to pee. I see a perfect spot, a very narrow path off my trail that led me quite clearly to a little hunting tower. I don't know what they're called in English. Wooden structures, couple meters tall, very simple, where hunters can go sit and wait for their prey. I walk over to the tower, put my bag down by the ladder that led up to it and begin peeing. I'm also interested in checking Google Maps to see where I am, but notice that there's no signal here. I decide to check my map. I also have a sip of water. I've been camping there for a good few minutes before I head back. Right before I ride back to the main trail, I thought to myself how extremely quiet it is. No wind, no noise of any kind, nothing. This made me realise just a moment later how alone I was, except the man who was standing maybe 50 meters away from me on the trail, in the direction where I was heading. I only saw this as soon as I stepped back on the trail, since the small one to the tower was well hidden by trees, and you couldn't see the main trail, as it was running perpendicular to the small one. I look at him. I was instantly chilled to the very bone. He was dressed in tactical clothing with a baseball hat on. The only reason he was standing still, I believe, was a moment of surprise that I had appeared from a place where he didn't expect me to appear from. At this point, I'm fully and utterly alarmed. He was holding a rifle that had a scope on it. Had this happened without the incident on the trail with the SUV, I would have probably walked along it thinking he's a hunter, However, in light of the strange encounter with the SUV, from which the second man was missing, something in me snapped instantly. In hindsight, it's also illegal to hunt in these woods at this time of year, so in a matter of seconds, I realise what's going on, and I sprint through the woods until exhaustion, towards and past the tower, as it seemed natural to do at the time. If there was no malicious intent on this man's behalf, or the others, he'll just think I'm an idiot and forget about me in minutes. Though if I'm correct, it's the best call I'll ever make, and for Christ's sake, he began running towards me. Adrenaline blossoming within me, I begin sprinting. I sprint past the tower, deep into the bushes, and not throwing my legs as I was wearing shorts and a thermal jumper. I crashed through the branches, small trees slipping on several occasions. I really did sprint until I'm exhausted. It must have been several kilometers. I even crossed some smaller trails, but didn't even bother looking either way. My pulse, 1,000,000,000. The whole time. I began checking my phone for signal, but nothing. I'm on my own now, no help. I was already angry at myself for not memorizing the license plate. I'm worried now, in a lonely place. After a while, I began power walking, but still off trail, straight ahead, in a direction that I knew would sooner or later lead me out of the woods. When my phone got a signal, I told the story to several people frantically, but no one took me seriously. They said I'm overreacting and whatnot. You must have misunderstood the situation. Well, I'll let you decide that for yourself if I did or not. Finally, I reached a trail that led directly to a cute little town that borders this rather large forest. It felt like an eternity, but I walked the longest road, back to the main square, take off my jumper, putting it in my bag. At least I looked a little different from far away, still scared, and alone. I wait for a bus that took me back to a station near my car, rather anxiously, after the bus ride, during which I studied each car on the road. I walked back to my car, got in and drove home. My dog welcomed me when I come back from a 2-year deployment. Dogs are amazing. They feel your pain and help you. She must have felt that something was up. I spent the afternoon contemplating my life in the tub, boots destroyed by my feet, but they aren't meant to be sprinted in for large periods of time. I call the gamekeeper's office, inquire about whether they have such cars. They do not. Their gamekeepers also typically work in pairs. 99.9% of the time, they're not alone. I told them my story. They took me very seriously. They assured me that the police wouldn't do anything, though. No one could have been legally hunting in the area during the summer either. I've been reading local news, but haven't found anything yet. I'm just glad I escaped. My husband and I are amateur mushroom hunters. 3 seasons out of the year, we spend weekends in forests, along natural trails and rivers looking for edible and interesting wild mushrooms to harvest. Springtime brings the most exciting hunt, which is for the highly coveted morels. We now have a special stretch of shoreline along a river that has a few dozen morels each year. It's difficult to get to as it's off the beaten path, You have to do quite a lot of ducking and climbing and maneuvering to get through. One day, 2 years ago, we're doing just that, making our way slowly, searching carefully for mushrooms hidden in plain sight. We're so preoccupied that we don't realize we're being watched or followed. But at one point, we see a man up ahead of us. He's looking at us and not saying anything or moving. It's almost as though he wants to be noticed. My husband saw him first, who then turns around to look at me, because we never encountered anyone in that spot before. It was besides a small and fairly busy park, but people didn't stray from the paved walk much. There's a weird energy about him. It can be described as menacing. We were near the end of what we wanted to look at. We turned around and started walking our way back. We looked behind us for a few moments and realized that he's gone. We wrote it off as just some weirdo, or maybe just a homeless guy whose territory we stumbled into. Now we continued looking over the spots we already covered in case we missed any morals. With me in front and my husband behind me, we're looking back every few paces, as we're feeling more paranoid as we go on. All of a sudden, I look up from the ground at my feet. The man is blocking our path up ahead, maybe 30 feet. We have to go left at the riverbank. We've realised he's crept alongside us on the path, getting ahead of us, now cutting us off. I whip around with huge eyes at my husband, who looks over my shoulder, sees him, starts to move up on the hill to our right hand side, grabbing my hand to pull me with him. Adrenaline shot into me, and we go out of the thick bush onto the paved path, into an open park moments later. Without speaking, we break into a full sprint towards the direction of our car, several blocks away. When we are far enough away from the riverbank to risk a backward glance, we saw the man emerge from the brush. He just stood there watching us, motionless. To this day, it still bothers me, and I wonder what would have happened had I been there alone. So this happened a year ago. I'm a 17-year-old girl. My family, aunts, uncles and cousins, etc. all share this cottage in a nearby campground. We've had it in the family since my mum was a teen, so since I was little, I've been going out there. Since we've been going out there for so long, we know the community well. A lot of strong bonds have formed with the neighbours and nearby campers, because everyone knows each other. This one particular incident, my friend and I, who were about 10 at the time, were out for a long walk. We only ever hung out there where the lake is, so we often went hiking along the same trail to kill time, which passed by a forest in the heart of the community. As we strolled along the path, we heard a light ching coming from the forest to our left. Our head snapped in the direction of the sound, and it stops. We shrug it off as we're 10, and don't get freaked out easily. We continue walking as the path turned, and our backs are now to where we started, but can hear the sound again. Once we're walking, we turn to where the sound's coming from, and once again, it stops. Now I don't know why we continued walking away, but we did. The forest was now a ways behind us when it starts up again. This time, I turned towards the mysterious song and started walking. The flute didn't stop playing, but instead got faster. I slowed my steps and realized the speed of the song, and it stops once again. The second we start walking away from the flutist, it bounces back into action and I start running to the tree line. The song ended when I was a few meters away, and the silence that followed was deafening. The girl I'm with took off running towards the main road and I followed. Now it could have been nothing, but for some reason we didn't tell anyone about what happened. Nothing like that ever happened again, but freaks me out thinking about it. Someone who we knew went missing that day. A person in our small community. Where? Who knows? I guess we'll never know what happened if we had actually crossed that tree line that day. It all started when a buddy of mine that I go to college with, Matt, and I decided to skip a day of class and take a weekend trip up to Penn, Earl County to get some late fall dirt biking in before it snowed and the season's over. We'd gotten some riding done in that area before, but instead of going to our usual romping grounds, we opted to shoot for a lesser known trail that a friend had told us about. So early Tuesday morning, we loaded up our bikes into our truck, printed out a map of the area that showed all the logging trails and a few official dirt bike trails in the area, and head out. Traffic was really light, so we arrive at the spot we're planning to. It only takes about 1.5 hours to get there. We have lots of daylight to go out and ride in. We both have headlights on our bikes and have agreed that a little bit of darkness won't stop our fun. After we unload, we lock up the truck, rode down the highway on the shoulder for about half a mile, then turned onto the logging roads with this awesome split off. It's a 10-ish mile ride down the logging trail to get to the trailhead, and we're probably a little over halfway there when, from behind us, we hear a loud engine. The speedster of a truck flies past us, nearly hitting Matt, then disappearing around the next turn, just as quick as he appears. It's not like Matt and I were going slow. We aren't pro riders or anything, but definitely not bad. The last time I checked, my tack were doing 40, which is pretty quick for a crappy abandoned loggers road in the forest. After this, Matt had stopped on the side killing his engine so he could make sure he knew how annoyed he was. "Did you see that? Yeah, he almost killed me," we said, etc. We decided that, while we were already stopped, we would take a quick break, drink some water, then get back on. And get back on we did. We found the trailhead and were loving it. The views were nice. The trail was technical without being unfun. The ground was wet and not soggy, and there were tons of additional trails that had been marked out by riders. Eventually we came across 2 separate offshoot trails, and we're going up the hill. We're racing one another to the top. We then read a sign marked "Ends at such and such creek," signs that are made from plywood and spray paint propped against trees. After consulting the map, we concluded that they probably did. One trail went over the hill, and the other more or less wound down into a small valley and around. I wanted to go low. Matt wanted to go high, so we split up. My ride was nice for the most part, though it did become very gravelly and steep at times, and I reached the bottom of the little valley, and as soon as I could see an open clearing at the end of the tunnel of trees I was in, and as I rode up, I could hear what I thought to be Matt's engine, and when I pulled off to the trees into the clearing by the creek, I saw that it wasn't a dirt bike I'd been hearing, but a gas-powered generator. This was powering what looked like an old stove that sat under the overhang of a windowless shack made out of pliers and 2x4s. Next to the makeshift house thing was a truck that I had seen earlier. I killed my engine, not wanting whoever's inside to hear me, and moved in a bit closer. I didn't get too close, but even from where I stood, probably 50 yards or more away, I could smell something. I could see that there was a big soup pot stove which was boiling, and I can only presume it's holding bleach. Judging by the containers that were strewn about the place. Now that's when I saw a guy coming running from behind the shack with a shotgun, looking at the woods near the other side of the clearing, screaming, "What do you think you're doing?" At that moment, I heard Matt's bike roar to life and immediately saw him tearing out of the tree line behind the shack. He saw me, and he rode towards me at full tilt. I hear him screaming at the top of his lungs, "Go, get out of there, he's got a gun." Luckily, my bike starts on the first kick, and I'm able to spin around and tear out of there, the way that I'd come on Matt's towel. I don't think I've ever gone so fast through the trails in my life, but somehow we made it out without either of us going down. We got back to the truck in little under an hour, and immediately noticed that ours was no longer the only one in the parking lot. The goddamn piece of pickup junk was there and beating us. It must have had a shortcut, the driver staring at us. Hoping that he won't approach us as we right off a decently populated highway, we quickly load up and leave. But he follows, and it was more than an hour before we were able to even lose him. The local police are called, but they pretty much told us that they can't look into it, because they wouldn't have time to. Needless to say, we never went right in there again. I'm a 25-year-old female, and have been living in Tokyo for 7 years. Never once had I felt threatened until this day. The city is incredibly safe, making you forget about stranger danger, which I know is unimaginable if you live in most big cities. Now, it happened a year ago. I went to see an orchestra with my friend, which finishes at around 10:30. She goes home, and it's a beautiful night, so I decided that I was gonna go for a walk around this area of the city. It's a part that I never normally go to, Tokyo Station. Now, on a semi-empty street, this 40-year-old man, dressed like a salaryman, stops, asks me how to get the subway. Now, it's a bit odd, but whatever. I pull out Google Maps, giving him directions. When I look up, I realised he wasn't listening and staring directly at me with these creepy eyes and a smile. He then said, "Where are you going?" I tell him I'm meeting my boyfriend, which is a lie. He then says if he can walk with me. I firmly say no. I turned around and walk away. Suddenly I hear him cry behind me, "Please, I beg you, please," in English, and he's literally on his knees. I freak out and begin walking away fast. When I look back, he got back to his feet and was walking in the same direction as me. Now, I know I should have been more freaked out, but it does happen that random Japanese guys ask to walk and talk with me. I'm mixed Asian but look more foreign. They give up after I firmly show I don't want them there, usually harmless. I get to the busy train station, which is basically thousands of people, like fish schooling. I move in random directions for 20 minutes to lose him. By that time, I'm pretty certain he couldn't have followed me in the crowd. I relax and stupidly go back to my plan of taking a walk by myself at night. I know. I walk through the gardens of the Imperial Palace with a huge park with no lights and no one to be seen at this time of day. I take dark, empty streets. I've forgotten about the creepy guy and just admire my surroundings, the architecture, and enjoy the quietness. I walk for almost an hour. I'm 4 stations away from where I met the creepy guy. It's past midnight, so I catch the last train home. I then go down the stairs to the closest station. I decide to stop and look down at my phone to check how to get home when I feel a tap on my shoulder. It's that creepy guy again, with even more insane eyes and smile. That's when dumb me finally realised psychos followed me through a crowd of people, a dark park, and a small empty street for over an hour. I start yelling my lungs out and making threatening gestures to get him away from me, and I run to the gates where there's more people. He then runs for one to catch me. I pretend to go down the stairs to the platform, and then quickly behind a column. I see him run past me frantically searching for me with his crazy eyes, but he doesn't look back. He doesn't see me. I run back up the stairs and get a different train. I call my boyfriend, who met me halfway up home. This went over the course of a year, with the last incident taking place in December of 2016. I used to own this green 1998 Toyota Camry. It was my grandmother's until she gifted it to my parents, who eventually gave it to me as my first car. It was nice and reliable, but I had a bad habit of letting my cars accumulate a bunch of stuff before cleaning them out. Because I still lived with my mum and dad, they would use the car from time to time if needed. One day, I noticed a bunch of fishing lines with hooks on them in the back of my car. On the rare occasions I cleaned it out. Now we lived in a forest, so it was normal to see people going fishing in the nearby lakes, but why on my car? A bunch of hooks are embedded into the upholstery, and more are between the creases in the seat. It takes me forever to get them all out. I almost pricked myself several times doing it. I have no idea how long they're up there, and the last time I cleaned out my car was months ago. At any rate, I'm annoyed. At first, I thought my dad had put them there, as he had recently used my car for a garage sale. I asked him about it, but he told me he's never seen any fishing hooks or lines in any of the old stuff. And nobody in the family even fishes, so it wouldn't make any sense for us to have used it. He's also the only other person that has used my car at all in the last 2 years. I'm the kind of person who looks up everything every night. I triple check my doors, and I'm even a little uncertain as to whether or not to lock up when I go back to my car and check, no matter the inconvenience. I also park it where I can see it from my bedroom window, and hear if anyone tampers with it, so I doubted anyone could have broken in, and I assumed my dad's missed it, and didn't think anything of it until a month later when I found even more fish hooks in my back seat. At this point, I asked my dad about it again, but he figures I'm either pulling a weird prank on him or someone's breaking into my car. I wonder though why anyone would break into my car, not steal anything out of it, and leave fishing hooks instead. It doesn't make sense to me. To give you an idea of how weird this is, I live in a neighbourhood where everyone knows each other. We all talk and even have a private Facebook group that started due to a drug house at the end of the street cropping up. As sort of a neighbourhood watch group that always posts whenever something suspicious happens, so I don't have any neighbours for miles, and the ones I do know are not shady. Again, without any explanation or clear motive, as the days and weeks pass, it fades to the back of my head. I get a new job selling mattresses, as I've been unemployed focusing on school for a while and move out of my mum and dad's home to live with my girlfriend. This is when things turn from weird to extremely unsettling. One night, we decide to go to a nearby Winco to get something to make food with, and I notice my back seat has a bunch of fishing lines and hooks in it again. Startled, I look around for any sign of someone being nearby. I tell her to get back in the home, and I sit up and stare at my car until morning comes from our bedroom window. Now, after triple checking every door and window to ensure they're all locked up, I don't see anyone or anything. I get ready for work, and she gets ready for college courses, and we leave. The store I was working at during this time had a weird L-shaped design to it, with two different entrances and a cafe taking up space between them. There was one entrance that was easily visible from the front desk, and another that you'd have to get up to see. As I was closing up for the night after the last incident, I go to turn off the open signs, and see in the centre of the obstructed hallway an entire row of fishing line coiled up, but with some of the line leading to the door, where a pile of hooks sat. I had no customers this day, and never heard the alarm go off. Then I noticed someone had turned the door alarm off, but neither I nor my colleagues had actually ever tampered with the device before then, and it was behind the front desk. I was shaken. Someone had been stalking me and leaving these lines, but I had no idea what to do. Call the cops? Other than the fishing lines and hooks, there really was no trace to anyone. My store had no cameras, and corporate would never agree to installing them. Neither my family nor girlfriend could afford security cameras either. I figured the best I can do is not appear as frightened as I am, in case whoever was doing this to me was watching me. I thought that if I see something like this, I shouldn't have to go about my day differently from any other, or it's suspicious. Now, for several months, I would always find fishing lines and hooks in my car, despite it being locked, and my parents being too busy with their extra jobs, taking time to actually look at the car. Now, once or twice a day, I would leave notes in my car asking whoever it was, why are they doing this, and to stop. I would find the notes were gone whenever the lines and hooks appeared, but with no response. Eventually, after a series of misunderstandings and disagreements with her family, I decided to move out of my girlfriend's house and moved in with a couple of friends into their apartment until my parents' new house could be completed. The very last time I had an encounter with the lines and hooks, I came home from work to find them strewn about the living room. Stuff is knocked all over the place and there's a few things broken, but nothing was taken. My friend, his girlfriend and their baby are all gone at the time, so no one was home when this happened, save for his cats who are absolutely spooked and wouldn't come out from under his bed for hours. I still didn't know what this person wants or wanted. Why are they stalking me in the first place? What do the fishing lines and hooks mean? No one I know is actually huge into fishing, and I specifically go out of my way to not make enemies or cross people, even purposefully giving people more than I take from them so I don't feel that I'm lining myself up to get done over. I really don't know if it was someone that I knew or a complete stranger freaking me out. All I know is that I'm gonna have anxiety for the rest of my life. I routinely stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning because of the traumatizing events. This has truly touched me in a bad way. Now it's been about 9 months since I've seen or heard from this person, but instead of feeling better, I feel more uneasy that someone followed me through that many changes in my life and didn't do anything further than breaking into my work and friend's house, but that at any time could have easily done anything to me or set up a trap or God knows what. This story isn't all that insane like a lot of other stories, but deeply unnerving to me. I was about 10, as a club scout. Every year to raise money, my troop sold popcorn, usually door to door. A leader, or one of our parents, would usually follow us in the car and drive us to different neighborhoods, so we're not completely alone while doing this. Often though, there weren't enough volunteers to come along, so the adult would wait at the end of the street and check up on us every half hour or so. I knocked on the door of this house near the woods. A woman answered the door, but didn't come out fully. Instead, she cracked the door open and looked at me and spoke to me through the crack. This wasn't particularly odd, as most people weren't sure what we're doing there at first, but the way she looked at me through the door was different. I somehow didn't notice anything at the time, but her face was only half exposed and completely horizontal, which meant she was standing completely behind the door for some reason. I started going through my standard sales pitch, going on about supporting the troop and on how high our quality popcorn is. But she stopped me in a low voice and said, "Oh dear, why don't you come inside and tell me more about this?" Thankfully, I was a big fan of scary stories as a kid, so alarm bells began ringing. I asked her why she didn't come outside fully, and her reply is in the same tone. "I have cancer, I can't." Now I didn't know much about cancer back then, but it didn't sound like a symptom to me. Before I could say anything else, she said, "Are you alone? Are you with anyone else?" I replied that the Cub Scout leader was down the street, and as soon as she heard that, she shut the door and locked it without a sound. I was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened, placing it around 2005 or 6. At the time I was living in southwest Florida with my mum in a not so great part of town. So one day, my mum is driving me to a scout meeting for girls through the forest. I'm in the rear driver's side seat directly behind my mum. We're at a busy intersection in the turn lane waiting for the light to turn green for us to make a right. This guy comes running down the middle of the road, like literally running between cars on the main road. He's screaming, "Help! Help me please." My mum sees him in the rearview mirror on her side, and although she's in a good place to be a kind person, she's also cautious, so cracks down her window maybe 4 or 5 inches to see what's wrong, thinking maybe he's gotten into a car accident or something. Guy comes running up to my mother's window, shoves his arm into the car, almost up to his elbow. He's obviously trying to open the door or hit the power locks or windows to get in. My mum, being the badass she is, punches the crap out of this guy. And you can hear a pop and a crack sound. She must have broken at least one of his fingers. She rolls the windows up, crushing his fingers and more bones than I ever thought you could in an arm. Meanwhile, I'm in the backseat, petrified to move. He starts beating on the window, saying we better let him in or he's going to kill us. At this point, the light turns green, and as soon as the car in front of us turned, my mum burned rubber to get out of there. We make it to the location for the scout meeting. By this time, I'm no longer in shock and start freaking out. I start crying a bit, but everything's okay. My mum calls the police department to let them know what happened, and we fled the scene. The officer informs her that someone's been robbed not even a block away from the intersection we're at. The suspect had fled on foot and eventually was caught, but the officer assumed that the man who tried to break into our car was the same one. At the time, I didn't think too deep into it. As I've got older, I started to think about it and just how dangerous it was. What if he was able to get in? What if he hurt my mum or me? What if he pulled out on my mum's driver's seat and drove away, or maybe had a weapon? Last summer, I was camping with my partner and our 30-pound dog alone in a creek in a popular area in a nearby national forest. It was an established site, but not a campground. Parking spot, fire ring, nice flat area with access to the creek. Now in the dead of night, we're awoken by a large truck parked by our car just idling. Eventually 3 men get out. They enter our camp. They're talking quietly. The truck and creek makes us unable to hear anything they're saying. I'm pretty sure it's not good now. Meanwhile, our dog has been growling in a low tone the entire time. Early on, I whispered to my partner to be quiet and hold the dog and hide. I got out of our sleeping bag, put my shoes on. The only thing I had for defense was a forest axe, halfway between a hatchet and axe. Very useful for getting by in the woods. I had a leather sheath with a metal button latch to protect the blade. Now they took their time, perhaps as intimidation, but eventually got closer to our tent. I loudly popped the metal button for the latch, taking the sheath off, preparing to become an axe murderer. Or maybe be murdered myself, apparently. All 3 of the men hear the latch. My assumption is they thought it's a gun holster, quickly left the camp, getting in their trucks and leaving without a word. I grew up in a small coal town in the Appalachian Mountains. On the side of one of the mountains that borders the valley of the town, it's a lovely place for an outdoorsy kid. We have no immediate neighbours and acres of woods to play in. Above our house was a ridge that ran along the border of a state park, but all the trails and public areas were far in the valley below, separated by a thick forest with plenty of no trespassing signs. So, we very rarely had hikers crossing over onto our land. From our home, there was a dirt road that wound up the mountainside to the top of the ridge. Where there stood the remains of a burnt down cabin. From there, you could follow the ridge to a flat area with Dad's hunting friends, one of whom posted a trail cam to monitor off-season activity. From there, you could continue up the ridge to a clearing that hosted lots of flat boulders and a giant electric tower that was fun to climb on. I'd venture up there often with the family's black Labrador, spending hours reading, climbing and enjoying nature. One early fall day when I was 13, I headed up there with a backpack full of snacks and a book. I'd taken care to avoid the trail cam, as it was the old film variety, and I gotten in trouble for accidentally filling entire rolls with me goofing around in the area. I reached my favourite rock at the edge of the clearing near the power lines, and just settled down to read when Felicia started to bark and growl aggressively. At first, I paid no attention to it, as she loves to chase deer, but this time, she didn't bound off into the woods after her quarry. Instead, she snuck up next to me growling at something unseen in the thick tangle of brush and trees on the steep mountainside that faces a park. Now, I'd consider hiking down that way into the park on occasion, but it wasn't an easy passage. The area had been cleared years before to install an electrical tower, and in its place had grown a thick mass of barbs and weeds. The rocks that were made great for climbing are on top of the ridge. Not to mention, there was much easier access closer to the park entrance. This brought you down to an undeveloped area at the very back of the campgrounds that wasn't easily accessible to cars or hikers. So I was taken off guard to see a man fighting his way through the brush in that direction. Nervously I called out hello, gripped Felicia's collar. She had a tendency to jump on people when she gets excited, and I didn't want to tumble her down the mountain. I'd overheard my parents arguing about lawsuits when she borrowed a jogger over the trail park. The man smiles, coughs, and makes his way up the hill to the base of my rock. I don't know if it was Felicia's reaction to him, or the rather remote and impassable way that he'd come from, but his presence made me uneasy. He seemed normal and friendly enough. He was probably in his mid to late 20s, average height and build. Rather unremarkable looking. No backpack or supplies, but he was dressed as a hiker would be. He didn't like the way he looked at me, although, in my young age, I couldn't place why it unsettled me. As a grown woman, I can look back and realise how he was sizing me up. He had a big smile on his face too. Hi there. Where'd you come from? No trace of an accent. Sticking out to me as odd. Our people have a strong regional accent, and we don't get any outsiders here. I live just down the hill. I was hiking with my dog. She seems like a nice dog, he told me, with no trace of irony. Felicia starts snarling and vibrating with menace, but he seems unfazed. Weird again. You should have her on a leash though, you don't want to get in trouble. I say we put her on a leash and we're down in the park, but this is our property. No reaction to learning he was essentially trespassing. Still, you're so close, you don't know who you might run up on here. I said no one comes up here, being a bit rude. He said I'm from the park, grinning. I'm one of the park rangers, and I wanted to see the property. What would you have done if she'd attacked me? You get in big trouble. At this time, I'm immediately chilled. We only had one ranger, and he was a close friend of the family. This guy was not him. But I was afraid to let on that I knew he was lying, so I dug out Felicia's collar and clipped her on the leash. Sorry, we'll let you get on with the hike, I have to go home, he says. Your parents know you're up here. Oh yeah, they expect me home soon. Do they often come here? Well, my dad does. He comes up to check on the trail cams. Trail cams? Yeah, there's loads up here. He smiled but looks cold. Well, these would make excellent hunting grounds. He took a step towards me, and Felicia lunged, nearly yanking the leash out of my hands. I managed to haul her back in time. His smile was gone. You should head back, I say, keeping a tight hold on the leash. Now, maybe I'll see you up here again sometime. Yeah, maybe, I said, secretly thinking to myself that I'd never step foot in the woods again. Well, bye. I quickly dragged Felicia away, looking back over my shoulder every now and then. He remains motionless in the spot where I'd left him, staring after me with that same smile. Once he was out of sight, I picked up the pace. Felicia growled over her shoulder a few times, and occasionally I heard branches snap behind me, but glancing back, I saw no sign of him following. I cut straight across the clearing with the trail cam, not bothering to avoid it in my rush to get away from the stranger. Once we hit the road that led home, I unclipped Felicia from the leash and broke into a jog. She remained by my side until I got home. I didn't mention the strange man to my parents at first. They're very wary of me going hiking alone, and I knew I wouldn't be let out if I said it. By the time I got home, I convinced myself that I'd overreacted to the whole thing. He's probably just a hiker and made up the bit about being a ranger to mess with me. Still, I didn't hike up to that ridge that week, instead sticking to the woods nearby. At the end of the week though, I came home from school to an annoyed dad demanding to know if I'd messed with the trail cam. His buddy had actually come up to collect the film, discovering the camera's switched off, with a few frames taken off. At first I was only concerned with getting in trouble and desperately professed innocence, and then I remembered the stranger. After telling Dad about him, he calls the park ranger to ask if there was a new ranger we didn't know about. He said no, but after hearing my story, he told Dad the campground attendant who caught an out-of-stater overnighting in an unauthorized area back behind the campgrounds a previous weekend. He'd assumed the guy was trying to get out of paying the fee. Young guy, average looking, overly friendly. He said it was a mistake and took off. Shortly after, we heard from Dad's buddy with the trail cam. He got on the roll developed, even though there's only a few frames still filled up. The last one is of me and Felicia cutting across the clearing. Thank God I told the stranger there's multiple cams. I imagine he'd given up after locating the other ones. My parents have since moved into a little snug neighbourhood down in the valley. I moved out of town, in my parents' backyard, on the river. There's a mountain covered by Easter lilies that marks Felicia's final resting place. The house I grew up in fell into despair and was sold and essentially burned to the ground. No one lives there now, but the clearing at the top is still popular with hunters. When I visit, I still hike up that ridge and always bring a dog with me. It was summer, I believe the day after the 4th of July, and my husband and I are in the middle of a crossroad trip. We're driving through Texas. Now, for any of you who have driven through Texas, you would have known how big the state actually is. Sometimes you'll go hours without seeing anything at all, and the towns we did pass through didn't consist of very much. Maybe an old rusty petrol station, a few little houses. Looking out the window, you'd swear you're driving through the same desert over and over again. I actually started getting a headache, and my husband suggested I took a quick nap to get rid of it. I remember allowing myself to doze off as I watched the beautiful colours of a desert sunset. The smell of the car awoke in me. Now the first thing I noticed is the beautiful colours of a desert sunset. The swaying of the car woke me up, and the first thing I noticed is how dark it is. I believe it's around 10 PM. My husband had stopped at a gas station with a shop. He told me he was going to grab us some food, asking if I needed to pee. Knowing I might not have another chance for quite a while when I went to the shop to use the restroom. Both the men's and women's restrooms are a little down the hall from the open area of the shop. I was groggy and tired and realised how badly I need to pee. So I shuffled into the restroom, made my way the short distance from the door to the nearest 2 stalls. I then make eye contact with a woman coming out of the other stall. She doesn't look quite homeless, but she was definitely a mess. Her hair was wild and grey, almost shoulder length if I hadn't been looking carefully. It looked as though she hadn't seen a brush for months. She wore ragged looking clothes, a pair of ill-fitting blackout shorts, and I remember noticing her foam flip-flops. She has several layers on top, one of them being a large purple and green coat. Keep in mind this is Texas in July. The jacket is hanging out over her shoulders like she hadn't taken it off properly. She was carrying something in a tied-up grocery bag. I gave her a quick smile as our eyes met. She just stares at me in return. Then the face turns wild and intense looking. Her eyebrows were set as though she's angry, but her eyes looked alive and wild. She looked at me like she's hungry. This made me feel that something was wrong with her. I try and brush it off. She waddled over to the only sink, and I took my time shutting the door because something about her posture in front of the mirror struck me as odd. She was standing with her body angled towards me, but her face was turned to the mirror. Her body was tensed, legs slightly crouched as though she's ready to act. Her hands were not up by her face, like you would be at a mirror. I wasn't sure why, but I felt uncomfortable. Now I regretted leaving my purse and things away from me with my cell phone in it. I shut the door, locking the stall behind me using the toilet. I wanted her gone before I left the safety of the stall. I stayed there long after I had finished, but the woman was still there, so I waited longer. Finally I heard the smacking of her flip-flops on her way to the door. I heard it open and slam close. The door was pretty heavy, having actually slammed the same way when I entered. I stayed for a moment and allowed a wave of relief to wash over me before I reached for the lock, then paused. Fingers only inches away from the lock. I'm now silent as I can manage to be, and yes, I hear breathing. The woman pretended to leave. At this point I was scared and confused. Why she tried to trick me into thinking she had left, only to stick around and be as quiet as possible. I knew something was wrong, so I stayed in the store even longer. This time it must have been about 20 minutes. I had no way of knowing for sure. I could tell from the direction her breathing was coming from. She positioned herself in the far corner, right next to the door, but far enough that I couldn't see her. Finally I hear her leave. This time I waited a few minutes to make sure she hadn't tried her trick again. I slipped out of the store quickly, washing my hands and rushing down the hallway to the store. It's pitch black outside. I had no idea where she was. She couldn't be far. A large man was checking out the register, so I waited near a window display until he left the store and quietly slipped out behind the door. Sure enough, crouched right outside of the door is the woman, surprised as she stands and turns away to the side of the store, walking quickly. My husband's waiting in the car and says I'm okay as I took a while. I said I'd say about it when we got away from the store. Easily the most scary experience of my life.